Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, my colleague Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about the new DOL rule on independent contractors. So this has been making headlines in the last week or so, since it came out on, I believe it was January 9th, but you might be seeing a new rule, independent contractor, news alerts, things like that. What are some things that employers should be thinking about with this new rule, Russell?
Yeah, so in some respects, it's kind of new rule, same as the old rule. And this is, I think, reflective of something, we may see next year, depending on how the presidential election goes. But, whoever's in charge of the White House has the ability to exert control over the Department of Labor. And Department of Labor makes rules on how they're going to interpret certain things, one of which obviously here being the independent contractor employee classification issue. So really what the DOL has done is kind of circled back to the pre-Trump administration interpretation from the Department of Labor, which focuses on the economic realities. And it's a multi-factor test, totality of the circumstances, and it looks at a lot of different things to determine whether someone's an independent contractor, a worker's an independent contractor, or an employee. During the Trump administration, the Department of Labor had really narrowed that down to focus primarily on the degree of control exerted by the putative employer, as well as the worker's opportunity for profit or loss based on their own initiative and work ethic. And what the Department of Labor has now done is expanded that back out. It still looks at those factors, but it also looks at things like investments by the worker, the degree of the permanency of the working relationship, as I said, the nature and the degree of the control. Also, the extent to which the work performed is an integral part of the putative employer's business, as well as the skill set and the initiative applicable to the worker. So, I don't know that it's a drastic difference. I mean, obviously, there's more factors, there's more things to consider. If a court's applying the test, they're going to have to hit all these different factors and perform some analysis of it. But really, at the end of the day, I still think it's about all these factors kind of get to that question of how much control is the business asserting over this worker. And that's still going to be a dominant factor, I think, in how we look at it from a counseling standpoint.
Yeah, and ultimately, when this gets to the courts, the courts are left to interpret these rules as well. And historically, since the Trump era rule, and between that time and now, not that much time has really actually passed. So things have not actually significantly changed in how things have actually played out. So I don't, over that time period, how we advise clients, how we talk to clients about this has stayed pretty consistent, even though this is a change. Also, not only because of this DOL rule, but there's a lot of other rules to consider as well. And they all have some similar, characteristics like you're describing. So we've always been paying attention to this because even if it's not the DOL rule, we're looking at the IRS rule, the state rules, the, FLSA. We're looking at a lot of different tests, and a lot of them do have a lot of the things you just described, Russell, and that's always been consistent. So it's something that we've just continued to look at and pay attention to when we talk to clients about what it means for someone to be an independent contractor versus an employee.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where you have this, a broad totality of the circumstances, multi-factor test. Means in a sense, what it's saying is we're going to consider everything. And as you said, Sarah, like even if the DOL says, well, we don't necessarily have to consider everything, like those things filter into what they were going to or were considering under the Trump era rule. But they go into the IRS's rule, which is a totally different test. They're the Fourth Circuit for those of us sitting here in Maryland, has applied the economic realities test. And then in Maryland, the state unemployment test is an ABC test. Which is similar to what they use out in California more broadly. So, I mean, there's really a lot of different ways to look at it. And, I think one of the main points from a business owner standpoint is you should know there are a bunch of different tests out there, and it's not, ever likely to be a simple black and white, yes or no type question. So you're going to have to navigate through this. You're going to have some understanding of the various tests in play and laws in play that you have to figure out how to comply with. And you should make your decisions informed based on again, to use the DOL term, totality of the circumstances, like you got to think about the totality of all the tasks and the various issues that, impact you as a business.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Russell, that, it's never going to be straightforward. So if it feels too straightforward, you're probably doing it wrong. So, certain things some employees are very clearly employees, but when it comes to looking at someone that's a contractor, it's going to be, like you said, Russell, these factors and things. So get beyond the headlines. It's with the gig economy and things, independent contractor tests and stuff make the news and are more newsworthy than they used to be. And so I think you look at the headlines, and if you just stop there, it could be very confusing for you. So I think that's a good moral of the story. Well, thanks, Russell, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.